that are posed and raised by the fiscal cliff that hits us on January the 1st of this year. I hope that changes. I hope we see that leadership, and I hope that we can get this country back on track. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
President.
The Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to associate myself with the remarks of the Senator from South Dakota who speaks so eloquently on the major issues facing our nation, the concerns for people all around the country, the quality of life, the cost of energy, the cost of their health care, the impacts of government regulations and rules that make it harder and more expensive for small businesses to add workers to their rolls. And I come to the floor today as a physician, a doctor who's practiced medicine in Wyoming, taking care of families there for about a quarter of a century, to do as I've done week after week since the health care law was passed, to give a doctor's second opinion about the health care law. Because one of the reasons I got involved in politics was, as a doctor, I was concerned for my patients, worried that they weren't getting the care they need from the doctor they want at lower cost, realizing the impacts of costs on the availability of care, the quality of care. And so when the health care law was passed, I had great concerns because I felt it was going to end up being bad for patients, bad for the providers, the nurses and doctors who take care of those patients, and terrible for the American taxpayers. And it was interesting during the discussion of the health care law when Nancy Pelosi, the then Speaker of the House, said that in terms of the health care law, first you had to pass it before you got to find out what's in it. Well, the law has been passed, and as more and more people are finally finding out what's in it, the law continues to be very unpopular. But it is interesting when a law is written behind closed doors, passed in the dark of night, when people on the side who voted for it actually never read it, didn't understand the implications, that here we are 2 years later with so many people still saying what's in it. And one of the things I wanted to visit about today, Mr. President, is an article, actually an editorial, in the New York Times from just a couple of weeks ago. This is while I was traveling around the state of Wyoming, visiting with people, visiting with former patients. An editorial came out with the headline, "A glitch in health care reform." A glitch in health care reform. Well, Mr. President, for 2 years I've been coming back to the Senate floor week after week after week, talking about things that were in the health care law, unintended consequences, things people didn't realize were there, didn't understand were there, were surprised to find out were there. And so the headline is "A glitch in the health care reform." Right under that, the subheadline is "Millions of middle-class Americans could be left without affordable coverage." And then my favorite line, the first paragraph, "Confusing language in the health care reform law has raised the possibility that millions of Americans living on modest incomes may be unable to afford their employers' family policies and yet fail to qualify for government subsidies to buy their own insurance." Confusing language. Mr. President, that's what happens when a law is written behind closed doors, not read by the people who vote for it, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the United States of America says first you have to pass it before you get to find out what's in it. And this, Mr. President, is an editorial in the New York Times 2 years after the health care bill has been signed into law. Confusing language, a glitch in health care reform. Millions of middle-class Americans could be left without. And so it is not a surprise that I will continue to come to the Senate floor with a doctor's second opinion, because we will continue to find where confusing language leaves people confused. Now, one of the areas that is so often discussed on the Senate floor is the Congressional Budget Office. Well, they came out today with a new report. It talks about the health care law. No surprise. They said they got it wrong a couple of years ago. They've re-looked at the numbers. This is the Congressional Budget Office, supposed to be an expert on making some assumptions and making some suggestions and some predictions. And today they came out with a report called "Payments of Penalties for Being Uninsured Under the Affordable Care Act." Now let's go back. payments of penalties for being uninsured. Well, this is a health care law that reaches into every home in America and says you must buy a government-approved product. You must have health insurance. Not enough money to pay for doctors to care for patients, but plenty of money for IRS agents to investigate the American people. And what does it say when you go through the report? They said, well, they thought that there would be about 4 million people that would have to be paying penalties for being uninsured under the health care law. Well, they were only wrong, they say, by 50%. They were off by 50%. Not 4 million, but 6 million Americans will be penalized and have to pay taxes under the health care law, as the Supreme Court found to be constitutional. Well, it may not be unconstitutional, but it is still unworkable, very unaffordable, and very unpopular. So I come to the Senate floor week after week as new reports continue to come out saying CBO was wrong, the New York Times, talking about confusing language. You know, Mr. President, I would say James Madison, the father of the Constitution, had it right when he said you should pass no laws so voluminous they cannot be read, so incoherent they cannot be understood. But that's what Democrats in the House and the Senate did when they passed and when the President signed the health care law. Now, another report has just come out within the last couple of days, and I recall the President, when he was talking about the health care law, he said that computerizing medical records, he said, would cut waste and eliminate red tape. Now, what does the report say? Well, it says that the amount of paperwork, the amount of man-hours put into just complying with the rules and the regulations, they have come up, they are predicting, and I'll get into those who have done the prediction, that businesses and families will end up spending 80 million hours a year on paperwork trying to comply with this health care law. A former Internal Revenue Service Commissioner, Fred Goldberg, says that the current form of the Obama health care law, he says, quote, will be a needless administrative and compliance quagmire for millions of Americans. The Ways and Means Committee in the House of Representatives under Committee Chairman David Camp found that more than half of those 80 million man-hours will be consumed by small businesses. Now, that is the group that can least afford to have to spend this kind of time, this kind of manpower. You know, you talk about productive work and non-productive work, and this goes in the category of non-productive work. So either they're going to have to hire more people to just do paperwork or take people from doing productive work and move them into the non-productive side. You're talking about 40,000 full-time people working the number of hours they would work to get you to this 80 million man-hours of work. It is wasteful. It creates no wealth overall to the economy. It is not a productive activity. So those are the things that we see week after week. And then finally, last week, there was a group of franchise owners who were traveling around visiting with members in Capitol Hill about the impact of the health care law on them and on their small businesses. And they want to hire people. They want to get people to work. We know that under the President's economy, there are 23 million Americans who are either unemployed or underemployed, people looking for work, looking for better work, looking for more hours. But let's look at the incentives as well as the consequences that are included in the health care law. Well, these small franchise owners, what they will tell you is that in order to try to comply with the law and not be driven out of business because of the expense of the penalties and the high level of insurance that they would have to provide to their workers, they only have a couple of choices. One of the choices, they don't like it, but one of the choices is to cut the number of hours that the employee works, because then they're a part-time employee and then they don't have to receive the benefits of the mandates of the health care law. That's not what they want to do. It's not what the employees want. They want to work more hours. But the consequences of what the Democrats in this institution have passed, the consequences are that people who want to work more are going to lose that opportunity. The other thing that they're looking at is saying, well, just drop paying insurance at all and pay the fine, pay the penalty. because because the consequences and the incentives are such that the fine is, from a business standpoint, the path to follow, rather than to provide a high level of insurance that the President mandates. But it may be a lot more insurance that the people want or need or that the businesses can afford. So I'll continue to come back to the floor, Mr. President, talk about the President's broken promises. He said if you like what you have, you can keep it. We now know many people who may like their health insurance aren't going to be able to keep it. He said the insurance rates would drop by about $2,500 per family a year. We've seen that the rates have gone up more than $3,000 a year instead of dropping $2,500 a year. The promises are many. The reality is quite different than what the President has promised. And that's why the American people continue to find the health care law unpopular. It's why our seniors, who have seen $700 billion of their Medicare dollars taken away from them, not to save Medicare, but to start a whole new government program for others. It's why they know it's going to be harder for them to find a physician to take care of them, especially if their doctor retires or if they move to a new location. And that's why I'll continue to come back to the floor to talk about trying to help people get the care they need from a doctor that they choose at lower cost. This health care law is bad for patients. It's bad for providers, the nurses and doctors who take care of those patients, and it's terrible for the American taxpayers. And that's why, Mr. President, I believe we need to repeal and replace this broken health care law. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor this afternoon to talk about the upside-down values and blatant dishonesty that Congressman Paul Ryan and other Republicans have put down on paper and are trying to present to the American people as a responsible budget. The truth is, it's anything but. Mr. President, the Ryan budget would be devastating for middle-class families. It would gut our investments in education and training, research, and our nation's future. And it would do all that while cutting taxes for the richest Americans and biggest corporations. Now, if that's not bad enough, it gets even worse. The Ryan Republican budget would permanently cut tax rates for the wealthiest Americans to the lowest level in more than 80 years. More than 80 years. And it would cut taxes for the rich below the scheduled top rate of 39.6%, below the Bush tax cut rate of 35%, all the way down to just 25% if you're a millionaire or billionaire. But, Mr. President, even that's not all. What Paul Ryan and the Republicans don't want people to know is their budget doesn't even add up. It's fiscal fraud. It's bait and switch. It's a desperate attempt to pull the wool over the eyes of the American people. Mr. President, Ryan and the Republicans claim they would pay for their massive tax cuts for the rich by, quote, closing loopholes and ending deductions. But they never say which loopholes they would close or which deductions they would eliminate. In fact, they've been pressed over and over to lay out their plan by the media, by the public, by Democrats, and they refuse. It's just a big secret. This past weekend, both Governor Romney and Representative Ryan were asked again and again to offer even one deduction they would limit. Pick one, any one, they were asked, so the American people could judge their plan. Both refused. It begs a simple question. What are they hiding? Well, former Reagan advisor Bruce Bartlett slammed Ryan's budget in a column in the Fiscal Times, writing, and I quote, "He offers only the sugar of rate reductions without telling us what the medicine of this base broadening will be." And he says, quote, "Any tax reform plan that simply asserts it will collect a certain percentage of GDP in revenue while specifying the rate structure but not defining the tax base is fundamentally dishonest, in my opinion," unquote. Well, Mr. President, I agree. Why is this? Why are Ryan and the Republicans so specific about the taxes they're going to cut for the rich and so vague about how that's going to be paid for? Well, Mr. President, Ryan and Republicans know when you do the math, it becomes very clear that under their Republican budget, the rich pay less, and the middle class pays more, and the national debt continues to grow. And the math doesn't add up. And here's why. Here's what the Republicans don't want the American people to think about. The most expensive loopholes and deductions, the ones Republicans would need to eliminate to even start paying for these tax cuts for the rich, those are the ones that middle-class families depend on and the ones they benefit from the most, like the personal and dependent exemptions, deductions for your home mortgage, charitable contributions, state taxes, local taxes, child tax credit, college tuition credit. These deductions are eliminated while tax rates are slashed for the rich. It would mean a massive transfer of the tax burden onto the backs of our middle class. The richest Americans get a massive tax cut, an average of over $250,000 a year for someone who makes $1 million a year, according to an analysis by the Tax Policy Center. But the middle class, those families that depend on those critical deductions, the home mortgage, those, they'd end up paying more. They would benefit far less from a marginal rate cut than the extra they would pay after losing those deductions. Now, if that sounds unbelievable, that's because it really is. And if that sounds like something no elected official would ever want to talk about doing, well, that's exactly right, too. So what Ryan and the Republicans do when they are asked is simply deny it. They simply say, oh, that's not the case. They claim that loopholes and deductions will only be eliminated for the rich and the middle class don't have to worry about anything. Well, it sounds nice, but here's what they won't tell the American people. It doesn't add up. The Tax Policy Center took a look at a plan that made a similar claim, and even viewing it in the most generous way, couldn't get it to work. They said, and I quote, even when we assume that tax breaks like the charitable deduction, mortgage interest deduction, and the exclusion of health insurance are completely eliminated for higher income households first, and only then reduced as necessary for other households to achieve overall net revenue neutrality, net effect of the plan would be a tax cut for high-income households coupled with a tax increase for middle-income households. So, Mr. President, that last point is very important. According to independent analysis, if you cut rates for the rich as much as the Republicans want to and pay for it by closing loopholes and ending deductions, there's no way to avoid having the middle class pay more. That's a fiscal reality, and it lays bare the fraud in the Ryan Republican budget. So, Mr. President, not only does the Ryan Republican budget decimate programs middle-class families depend on, not only does it end Medicare as we know it and push health care costs onto the backs of our seniors, not only does it cut investments in jobs, in education, in training, in research, in innovation, in roads and bridges, it doesn't even add up. It's a fiscal fraud. So I'm hoping now that the American people have the opportunity to see this clearly. Republicans will stop playing games. Let's get serious about the fiscal future of our country and work with us on a balanced approach to this, to cut spending responsibly, call on the wealthy to pay their fair share, and actually reduce the deficit and the debt. And as soon as they're ready to do that, Mr. President, as soon as they're ready to accept reality and end this fiscal fraud, I know Democrats are ready to make the kind of balanced and bipartisan deal the American people expect and deserve. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. As we wait for a senator to speak, an update on some of our live coverage tomorrow. The Justice Department's internal watchdog has referred more than a dozen people for disciplinary action after a failed gun trafficking investigation in Arizona. That report, released today, found no evidence that Attorney General Holder knew about Operation Fast and Furious before January 31, 2011. Inspector General Michael Horowitz will discuss that report tomorrow morning before a House committee. And we'll have live coverage of that hearing at 9:30 Eastern Time on C-SPAN 3. Now we're going to go back to Senator Tom Harkin talking about the fiscal cliff. Those are budget cuts and tax increases set to happen in January.
Senator Tom Harkin, a Democrat from Iowa, joins us now to discuss a number of legislative issues facing Congress right now. But, Senator, if you would, want to get your take on Governor Romney's comments about the 47% of Americans that he says are dependent on the government.
Well, first of all, I find it very startling that someone of his stature and someone who's been in government as long as he in business would actually say something like that, especially in an unguarded moment, because that sort of gives you an idea of what he's thinking. I mean, I don't know who he includes in that 47%. Does he include students who are getting loans to get through college, or elderly who rely upon Social Security, or veterans who are using the GI Bill? You know, a lot of people, you know, I've often said the government is there to help provide a ladder of opportunity. And that's everything from education to job training, Social Security, disability. There's a lot of things that we do together that really enhances us as individuals. And it seems like Governor Romney simply wants to shred that kind of a social contract that is, I think, kind of uniquely American. Bruce Bartlett, who was an economic advisor to President Reagan, said, and I've been using his quote on the Senate floor, he said that the Ryan budget distributionally was a monstrosity, because it shreds the social contract, which we have built up here in America over the last, well, at least over the last 100 years. So I just find Governor Romney's statement on that just, I don't know, just kind of baffling, bewildering that someone would say something like that.
You're a guy who's championed some of these social safety net programs. His comment that these folks believe they are victims and therefore believe the government has a responsibility to care for them.
I don't see that at all. When I see a poor family, let's say, with that don't have much, and they're struggling to make ends meet, and they want their kids to have the best education, and get in good schools and get a good education so that they can do better in their future. They don't see themselves as victims. They see themselves as part of the American dream. I know wherever I speak. My father had a 6th grade education. My mother was an immigrant. We didn't have much of anything. But what they wanted for their kids was a decent life. They wanted a good education so their kids could have a better life than what they had. That's not victimization. That's the American dream.
And we're doing the lines standard for this segment with Senator Harkin. Democrats can call in at 202-7.
Consent the call according be terminated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we're trying to work through all the issues we have, and there's a few of them, not too many, but a few. But I want everyone to know that we can finish all of our work tomorrow. If we don't finish it tomorrow, we're not going anyplace. We're staying here until Tuesday, probably at 3:30, because we have Yom Kippur on Wednesday. But we'll be right back here on Thursday. We have to finish our work. So that means if we can't work things out, we're going to be here Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I know that we talk about this once in a while, and usually we're able to work things out, and I'm glad that we are. But just in case we can't, no one should think they're going to be able to catch an airplane out here tomorrow. Friday, I'm sorry. Mr. President, I'll be very quick. I know that the assistant leader for the minority is here, and I don't want to take a lot of time of his. The Senator from Montana, Senator Tester, has assembled a broad package of legislation. It's bipartisan nature, and that's an understatement, to support the needs of sportsmen throughout the country. He has worked with these groups, and I've been in meetings with him where he's tried to get the Democratic senators to back off let this package go forward, and there's been some adjustments made because of problems that Republicans had and Democrats had. So I appreciate very much his work. What his bill does, it combines about 20 bills that are important to the sportsmen's community around this country. These measures would promote hunting, fishing, recreational access, and they would foster habitat conservation through voluntary programs. More than 50 national groups support this. These are sportsmen and conservation groups. This is an example of leadership that is important in this body, that work on something that brings together a disparate group of bills and they're bipartisan in nature and try to move forward. We ought to pass this package today. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to counter number 504, S3525, the Sportsman Act of 2012. That they'll be read a third time, passed, and motion reconsider be laid on the table with no intervening action or debate. Any statements related to this matter be placed in the record at the appropriate place as if given.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. Thank you. I had asked the distinguished majority leader if I requested an amendment to his request to add a piece of legislation that he and I both support, whether he would have to object to that. And I presume his answer is that he would have to object. And as a result, rather than doing that and forcing him to object, I'll simply pose my objection at this time.
Objection is heard. Senator from Montana.
Mr. President, I rise today to discuss the Sportsman's Act. The Sportsman's Act is a good piece of legislation. It's a piece of legislation that, quite frankly, one of the few times in this body that Democrats and Republicans can come together and actually do something that's good for this country and not play politics with it. Our outdoor traditions in this country are deep and they're an important part of our heritage. And that's why 2 years ago when I became chair of the Sportsman's Caucus, I made it a goal to do something significant that will help this country's hunters and anglers. Mr. President, this week we have an opportunity. We've got an opportunity to play politics as usual, or we have an opportunity to get something done. This Sportsman Act is the biggest package of sportsman bills in a generation. It combines, as the Majority Leader said, nearly 20 different bills, all important to the sportsman's community. These bills increase access for recreational hunting and fishing. They support land and species conservation. They protect our hunting and fishing rights. And most importantly, they take ideas from both sides of the political aisle. It's not about Democrats. This bill isn't about Republicans or independents. This bill is about Americans and the great outdoors that we all share as a nation. This bipartisan bill is supported by 56 different conservation and wildlife groups, ranging from the Nature Conservancy and the National Wildlife Federation to the NRA. It earned their endorsements because it includes a wide range of responsible provisions that are important to the sportsmen and women across America. Mr. President, in my role as chairman of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, sportsmen continually tell me about the importance of access to public lands. Right now, there are 35 million acres of public land that sportsmen cannot access. That's why this bill requires 1.5% of the annual funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund set aside to increase public land access, ensuring sportsmen across the country to some of the best places to hunt and fish in this country. This bill also reauthorizes the North American Wetlands Conservation Act. This voluntary initiative provides matching grants to landowners who set aside critical habitat for migratory birds like ducks. Over the last 20 years, volunteers across America have completed more than 2,000 conservation projects and protected more than 26 million acres of habitat under this successful initiative. The North American Wetlands Conservation Act is a smart investment in both our lands and our wildlife, and it needs to be reauthorized. This bill doesn't. My widely supported bill also authorizes the Secretary of Interior to reevaluate the price of duck stamps to keep up with inflation. Revenue from these duck stamps has been used to purchase or lease more than 6 million acres of wetlands and preserve
a viable waterfowl population. And this bill also funds new shooting ranges while encouraging federal land agencies to cooperate with state and local authorities to maintain existing ranges. This is a responsible bill that takes into account the needs of the entire sportsman community. Now, some folks around Washington are asking, well, why is this important? But hunting and fishing is a way of life in places like Montana. 1 in 3 Montanans hunt big game, and over 50% of Montanans fish. And outdoor recreation contributed $646 billion in direct spending to this economy in this country just last year. Hunting and fishing is not just recreation. It's a critical part of our economy. In Montana, hunting and fishing brings $1 billion a year to our economy, nearly as much as our state's cattle industry. It's big business. It drives and sustains jobs. And with bow hunting season open and rifle season opening just a few days, this bill is as timely as ever. Mr. President, the Sportsman's Act of 2012 is balanced, it's bipartisan, it is widely supported, it is fiscally responsible. The bill has no cost. I've been chairman of that Congressional Sportsman's Caucus for 2 years. In that time, I've had folks from all across the country tell me why they love to hunt and fish. They've also told me how outdoor activity supports our economy and creates new jobs while sustaining old ones. They told me about how much their outdoor heritage means to their families, about how concerned they are about losing those traditions. And frankly, they've told me how frustrated they are with Washington and how too many good ideas from both parties, get left behind because of political gridlock right here. Mr. President, by approving this sportsman's package, we will conserve some of our most productive habitat, pass on our hunting and fishing traditions to future generations, and entrust the land and water we share to them. Sportsmen from across the West have been waiting for a bill like this for a generation, a bill with widespread support that preserves our outdoor economy and secures our outdoor heritage for our children and grandchildren. I know it's getting close to election season, but we have time left, the time that we're working on the taxpayers' dime, and I think we ought to get something done. Let's take some good Democratic ideas and some good Republican ideas and pass them. Let's actually do something for the 90 million sportsmen and women that reside in this country and build our economy. Now is the time, Mr. President. Now is the time. We've got an opportunity here to take a bill that does good things for this country across the board, that quite frankly, if a vote was held on this bill today, I'm confident would pass with a large bipartisan majority. But as long as we're going to play political games and as long as we're going to hold stuff up, we'll never get to the point where we can do what's right by the American people. Mr. President, I urge we get to work and get her done. With that, I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The pending business here in the Senate, the temporary spending bill that would fund the federal government through March of next year. That bill passed the House last week. That resolution passed the House last week. Right now, we're going to watch the White House briefing that dealt primarily with Libya and Afghanistan. There was also a question about the video released by Mother Jones magazine on Mitt Romney at a fundraising event in Boca Raton, Florida.
I could get the State Department. You gotta go. What?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning. Thanks for being here. Before I get started, as some of you have seen reported, I can tell you that later this afternoon, the President will meet with Aung San Suu Kyi at the White House. The President looks forward to her visit as it provides another opportunity to reaffirm our long-standing support for her struggle and the struggle of many others toward democratic, just, and transparent governance in Burma. This is her first trip to the United States in more than 20 years. The President very much looks forward to that visit. That's all I have at the top. Late afternoon, around 5 o'clock.
Will there be a photos party?
We're still press coverage TBD, but we're working on it. Jim.
Thanks, Jay. Two foreign policy issues. Reports that Iran is using Iraqi airspace to deliver weapons to Syria. The issue came up today in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. What steps is the President prepared to take to prevent Iraq from allowing Iran into its airspace? Any conditions on financial aid or anything like that?
Well, let me just say broadly that we have made clear to countries around the world that we all need to work together to prevent Assad from acquiring weapons that he can use to continue to perpetrate violence against his own people. And that's a message that we carry in conversations with leaders everywhere. I don't have anything specific for you with regards to Iraq, and I'm not aware of the meeting on the Hill that you referenced. But that is something we're concerned about generally. We've worked very hard with our international partners to cut off access to weapons and financing for Assad, and we continue to do that.
On China, Secretary Panetta returned from his trip there and reported that Chinese leaders are expressing concern over a U.S. military shift to the Pacific. Does the White House have any concerns that together with the attention that China has been getting in the presidential campaign is increasing any tensions with the Chinese?
What I said yesterday holds true today, which is that we have a very complex, broad relationship with China that is extremely important, and when we meet with the Chinese at the level of the President and below, we engage with them on all of the issues that are part of our relationship, and that includes areas of disagreement as well as areas of cooperation and agreement. We obviously have an important trade relationship and economic relationship as well as military-to-military relationship. We are, as the President made clear on his trip to Asia last fall, a Pacific power. We have a presence there that's important to the United States and to the region, and we intend to pursue that. But this is about broader issues than China. It's about the fact that the United States is obviously a Pacific power with Pacific interests, and you know that this President believes that in the 8 years prior to him taking office, there was a loss of focus when it comes to Asia by the previous administration because of all the concentrated attention on Iraq in particular. and he has sought to rebalance our national security, foreign policy, and international economic posture towards Asia for that reason.
Some protests in China that the U.S. presence has emboldened other countries like Japan on territorial disputes. Does the President feel that do you want to put your finger on the scale on issues like that?
No, look, we believe that good relations between China and Japan benefit everyone in the region. And U.S. policy on the Senkaku Islands, which I think is the issue at the moment, is longstanding and has not changed. The United States does not take a position on the question of the ultimate sovereignty of the islands, and we expect the claimants to resolve the issue through peaceful means among themselves. Jeff.
Jay, does the President have any reaction to the end of the teacher strike in Chicago yesterday?
His position has been that he hoped to see both sides in the dispute come together, reach an agreement that could serve and would serve the interests that were paramount, the interests of the children of Chicago, the students in the Chicago school system. And he certainly welcomes resolution to the dispute and welcomes the fact that kids have returned to class this morning.
And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, oil prices are falling again. Do you have anything updated today to say about the SPR and your thinking about that?
I don't. Our thinking remains what it was. In regular consultation with our international partners, we monitor global oil markets, and we keep all options on the table to deal with disruptions if necessary. But I have no announcements to make on that.
Is there a price level that would change this thinking at all? Oil prices and or gasoline prices in this country?
Again, Jeff, it's the kind of thing that I won't get into great specificity on. We simply monitor the situation, mindful of the impact that higher global oil prices have on global economic growth, American economic growth, and mindful of all the various implications that arise when you have a situation like that. But I'm not going to get into the details of price levels or reserve levels, and suffice it to say that the President insists that all options for dealing with this issue remain on the table, and that includes the SPR.
You mentioned yesterday, just last follow-up on this, you were pleased about Saudi Arabia's action. Can you talk a little bit about what types of negotiations or discussions happened between the White House or U.S. officials and Saudi officials on this?
No, I can simply say that we welcome the Saudi Arabian oil minister's recent remarks and share his concerns about rising oil prices, broadly speaking, not in recent days, but rising prices in the international oil market. And we welcome Saudi Arabia's continued commitment to take all necessary steps to ensure the market is well supplied and to help moderate prices. But we have ongoing consultations and conversations with our allies and our partners, including Saudi Arabia, on this issue and many others.
Okay. In the wake of the attacks in Benghazi, the Pentagon and the State Department both made statements that they then had to correct the Pentagon involving whether or not there were Marines at the embassy in Tripoli. There were not, and the State Department regarding the presence of security firms at the Benghazi compound. Why was there such confusion, and is the White House or anyone conducting any sort of internal investigation as to what went wrong?
Well, there is an ongoing investigation into what happened in Benghazi that's being led by the FBI. And
that one, I'm not talking about the criminal act. I'm talking about obviously there wasn't adequate security. That along the lines of what went wrong, what the administration could have done better.
Right. I think I would refer you for questions about security at the Benghazi diplomatic facility and broadly speaking at diplomatic facilities, consulates, embassies around the world to the State Department. In terms of statements that were corrected by Defense or State, I would refer you to those departments. From our perspective, we got out to you the information that we had as soon as we had it, and it was available. And our assessment of what happened has been based on the best available information that we've had. There is an ongoing investigation led by the FBI now, going back to specifically what happened in Benghazi, and we await the results of that investigation for more information about the protests and the attacks and what precipitated them and who participated in them, with the primary objective here of fulfilling the President's commitment that that those people responsible for the deaths of 4 Americans be brought to justice.
What reason could there be, or let me rephrase that, who made the decision that there should not be Marines at our diplomatic posts in Libya? More than half of our diplomatic posts have Marines. I understand they're not there to protect people, they're there to protect classified data, but it doesn't hurt to have them there. Who made the decision?
Well, I think security at diplomatic facilities is overseen by and run by the State Department, so I would refer you to them about how decisions are made and what the allocation of resources was in Benghazi and elsewhere. I think they're the best people to answer that question.
Is the President concerned that there was a failure by someone in the administration to ensure adequate security measures, whether through...
The President is concerned that violent actions were taken that led to the deaths of 4 Americans. You can be sure that he's concerned about that, and he is absolutely concerned that we take the necessary measures to make sure that those who killed Americans are brought to justice. And he has been focused from the beginning on ensuring that adequate security reinforcements be brought to bear at embassies and consulates and diplomatic facilities where that's deemed necessary. Again, there's an investigation, I think a broad investigation into what happened and how and why in Benghazi, and we will await the results.
That's about the perpetrators of the violence.
Well, I think it encompasses everything that happened. I mean, I'm sure that they will look at everything that happened there. I mean, I would refer you to the FBI for details, but look, I mean, Jake, I think what happened in Benghazi...
The anniversary of 9/11, an unstable country with roving bands of individuals who are armed, a government that says it itself cannot provide security, it's not ready to do so yet, and it would just seem not that complicated to discern that there needs to be some sort of serious security effort there to protect our diplomats.
Jake, I appreciate the question, and I understand it, and I can simply say that there is an active investigation into what happened in Benghazi that led to the killing of 4 Americans. And the President has taken action to make sure that we have reinforced security at facilities as deemed necessary, and is very focused on ensuring that we bring to justice those who killed Americans abroad. But I appreciate your question. I think that we are awaiting the results of the FBI investigation.
Okay. And one other subject, did the President have any response to the Office of Special Counsel report on Secretary Sebelius violating the Hatch Act?
I have not spoken to him about it. I think that Secretary Sebelius has responded to that and made sure that what was her remarks were extemporaneous. The Health and Human Services Department has since reclassified the event to meet the correct standard. The U.S. Treasury has been reimbursed, and Secretary Sebelius has met with ethics experts to ensure that this never happens again. The error was immediately acknowledged by the Secretary and promptly corrected, and no taxpayer dollars were misused.
Is it safe to assume that, as far as the President is concerned, that's the end of the matter?
Well, I think it's safe to assume that action has been taken by the Secretary and the Department to remedy what was the result of an inadvertent error based on extemporaneous remarks, and she acknowledged it immediately, promptly corrected it, and ensured that no taxpayer dollars were used, and that the event, the department reclassified the event to make sure that the correct standards were met.
Thanks, sir.
Dan.
Thank you, Jay. Aside from the FBI investigation, doesn't the White House have its own intelligence that would allow you to say with some degree of certainty that the attack in Benghazi was either a coordinated attack or a spontaneous reaction to the movie?
The White House doesn't have its own intelligence, Dan. The White House has, the White House is the,
I mean,
outside of the intelligence community of the United States government?
Outside of the FBI investigation, you don't have...
Are you suggesting that we have a clandestine intelligence operation here in the White House?
You are able to find out a lot of information on your own, independently, and what I'm saying, in addition to what the FBI is doing, does the White House not have information that it has gathered?
I think the FBI is leading an investigation that will encompass all of the information available to the White House and to the intelligence community and the broader diplomatic community. What I can tell you is that, as I said last week, as our ambassador to the United Nations said on Sunday, and as I said the other day, based on what we know now and knew at the time, we have no evidence of a pre-planned or premeditated attack. This, however, remains under investigation, and I made that clear last week. And Ambassador Rice made that clear on Sunday. And if more facts come to light that change our assessment of what transpired in Benghazi and why and how, we will welcome those facts and make you aware of them. But again, based on the information that we had at the time and have to this day, we do not have evidence that it was premeditated. We have, it is a simple fact that there are, in post-revolution, post-war Libya, armed groups. There are bad actors, hostile to the government, hostile to the West, hostile to the United States. And as has been the case in other countries in the region, it is certainly conceivable that these groups take advantage of and exploit situations that develop, when they develop, to protest against or attack either Westerners, Americans, Western sites or American sites. And again, this is something that's under investigation. We have provided you our assessment based on the information we've had as it's become available. As more information becomes available, we will make clear what the investigation has revealed.
And another question on Afghanistan, given some of the developments that we've seen there recently, does the President still believe that Afghan forces are capable of handling their own security and will be able to do so in time for the 2014 deadline?
The President believes that after a decade of war, we can and should pursue a strategy that transitions security authority over to Afghan forces and allows us to end the war in Afghanistan and bring home our men and women in uniform. That process is underway. We have gotten to this point because the President, having inherited a policy in Afghanistan that was widely viewed as adrift, without a focused mission, under-resourced, he very deliberately, working with his national security team, honed in on what the proper objectives should be in Afghanistan, made clear that our #1 objective in that region was to disrupt, dismantle, and ultimately defeat al-Qaeda, and to ensure, in support of that goal, that Afghanistan could not become a safe haven again for al-Qaeda or other extremists who have as their objective attacking the United States or U.S. allies. And that the execution of that strategy continues. It led initially to a surge in U.S. forces, which halted the Taliban's momentum, which allowed us to take the fight to al-Qaeda in the region in a way that we had not been able to before, that led to the decimation of al-Qaeda's leadership, including the elimination of Osama bin Laden, and has now allowed us to draw down the surge forces and to continue the transition to Afghan security forces, responsibility for security of that country. That process continues. As I said the other day, we are very concerned about the green-on-blue attacks that have been taking place in Afghanistan, the increase in those attacks, and our commanders are taking measures to ensure that there is more security for our troops in Afghanistan. But the process of partnering with and training Afghan security forces continues, and the process of transitioning to Afghan security lead continues. And the President has made clear that the pace, the drawdown of U.S. forces will continue. The pace of that will depend on evaluations by and assessments by commanders on the ground. But it will continue, and he remains committed to ending the war in Afghanistan in keeping with the NATO objectives by 2014.
It continues, but does he think they will be prepared to handle their own security?
Thanks to the extraordinary sacrifice of our men and women in uniform and our partners, men and women in uniform, we have made tremendous strides towards enhancing the capacity of and the numbers of Afghan security forces. And that remains a fact even as we contend with this serious problem with green-on-blue attacks. Despite the effort, it is true that while we have changed the directives involved in partnering with Afghan forces, it remains true that for a long time now there have been extraordinary number of missions conducted successfully where U.S. forces or ISAF forces have partnered with Afghan forces, and it is essential for Afghans' future that Afghan security forces be able to take over security for their country. And it is certainly in the interest of the United States that after a decade of war, we continue with that transition in keeping with the President's mission.
The government
Bill.
still maintains there was no evidence of a pre-planned attack. How come?
Bill, let me just repeat now. Again,
how is it
based
the
on the
attackers had
information.
RPGs, automatic weapons?
Bill, I know you've done a little bit of reading about Libya since the unrest that began under Gaddafi. The place is has an abundance of weapons.
No question about it.
And,
do you expect a street mob to
are,
become armed that way?
There are, unfortunately, many bad actors in that country, as there are throughout the region, and they have they're very armed. I'm not. The point is, you can make suppositions about what happened. We prefer to have an investigation that looks very closely into what happened and assembles the facts and presents them. Based on all I'm saying.
Our people on the ground have seen the fragments of the remains of the mortars and the heavy weapons that were used.
We made clear that there were armed assailants who used heavy weapons. We obviously haven't disputed that. And
this is just a random crowd that got together with their heavy weapons, got insulted by the film, and decided to go,
As I think I just said, there has certainly been precedent in the past where bad actors, extremists who are heavily armed in different countries and different regions of the world have taken advantage of and exploited situations that have developed in order to either attack Westerners or Western assets or American assets. That is not.
Plans to do it, don't you think?
They might or they might not. All I can tell you is based on the information we had at the time, we have now, we do not yet have indication that it was pre-planned or premeditated. There's an active investigation. If that active investigation produces facts that lead to a different conclusion, we will make clear that that's where the investigation has led. It's not, our interest is in finding out the facts of what happened, not taking what we've read in the newspaper and making bold assertions that we know what happened. We'd rather investigate it.
But doesn't it seem likely? Given
I think that goes back to making presumptions about what happened, that we'd rather investigate it. Yes.
Jay, there were a fair number of questions yesterday about the Romney tape and what he had to say. There was a tape that the Republicans immediately tried to distribute yesterday, I guess, to push back. That's fairly old, 14 years ago. The president talking about redistribution. My question is, from a policy standpoint, the Republicans seem to be trying to use that tape to suggest that the president's goal is to redistribute income and wealth. And can you say, from a policy standpoint, whether that is a fair characterization or not?
Ed, I would say that all of us who follow politics and policy, whether we're on this side or your side of the podium, have seen circumstances like this where a campaign is having a very bad day or a very bad week. And in circumstances like that, there are efforts made, sometimes desperate efforts made, to change the subject. You know, the charge based on this 14-year-old video sounds very familiar to one that was tried and failed in 2008. You know, 14 years ago, then Senator Obama was making an argument for a more efficient, more effective government, specifically citing city government agencies that he did not think were working effectively. He believed then and believes now that there are steps we can take to promote opportunity and ensure that all Americans have a fair shot if they work hard. He certainly doesn't believe, as some apparently do, that any student who looks for a government-backed loan is looking for a handout, or that a senior citizen receiving Social Security is a freeloader, or a combat veteran not paying taxes is a victim. He believes that we need to make government more effective and more efficient. He believed that then. He believes it now.
But when he says pool resources in that tape, that we need to pool resources, and he believes in redistribution, does that, since you're characterizing what he meant 14 years ago with confidence, was he also suggesting he believes in redistribution of wealth?
The President believes that we have to have a government that works efficiently and effectively and wisely in the use of taxpayer dollars on behalf of the American people, that advances the American economy, that helps provide opportunity to middle-class Americans and those seeking to enter the middle class. He certainly believes that programs like Social Security and Medicare that...
And I would ask unanimous consent that proceeding